Hello, everyone. Thank you for being part of Take Our Kids to Work Day, and welcome to our session on the coming creativity boom. I'm Cynthia Leach from RBC Economics. Our team wrote a report on the creativity boom, and we got to talk to Josie Fung, an expert that we'll also hear from today. But before we get into creativity in the report, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home in Canada. As we gather today on these lands, we are in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers, sisters, two-spirited peoples, and family to honor and respect the four directions, lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walk before us, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. And as we reflect on the historical and ongoing relationship between Canada's education system and Indigenous peoples, we are highly aware of how much work there is to do to repair the relationship with Indigenous students, parents, families, and communities. We recognize and their cultures, and to take concrete actions as identified in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 2015 report. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people who call this nation home. And now I'd like to introduce you to Josie Fung. She's the executive director of I Think, which is an educational nonprofit out of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Josie and her team pursue systems change in education by bringing real-world problems to the classroom, and in doing so, creating confident problem solvers. Josie, welcome to the session today.
Thanks, Cynthia. Looking forward to today.
Today is Take Our Kids to Work Day, where a lot of, I'm sure in our audience are thinking about where their interests lie and where their careers might be. Why don't you take a few minutes to talk to us about what you do in your role and how you got there?
Sure. So I actually have multiple roles. I think that now we're in a kind of a world where we rarely have one job. And so part of my job is being executive director of I Think. And what that means is I'm helping build an organization thinking about how do you actually do the work of bringing creative problem solving into classrooms and make an impact in hopefully every classroom across Canada. On my other hat, I also teach as a professor at in the commerce program at the Rotman School of Management, where I teach around creative problem solving and strategy. I guess my third job is I actually work with organizations thinking about how do they make strategic choices to help their organizations grow. And so on a day-to-day basis, I actually spend a lot of time on whether it's Teams or Zoom in meetings talking to people, because a lot of my job is actually listening to people, trying to understand their thinking and helping them do a better job of articulating and sharing with other people, because the more we can do to understand each other, the more effective we can to learn from each other.
And that sounds very interesting, Josie. What education or experiences do you think were important to bring you to where you are today?
So I've not taken a very straight path to thinking about to my jobs today. I was really lucky in my undergrad. I went to the University of Toronto and I had the opportunity to actually just choose courses that I was interested in. So I took courses from political science to zoology to botany to math to architecture. And so generally that's not the path people choose. Usually people choose a program and then take courses from it. But because I kind of chose all these different courses of things I was interested in, I ended up with a very strange undergraduate degree in political science and zoology. And so there are no jobs out there for people who call themselves political science zoologists. I actually had the opportunity to run a technology startup. So I was a director of operations for a technology company. And from there, I decided to do my MBA. And at my MBA, I kind of discovered this whole world of helping other people think and solve problems in different ways. And that's where I had the opportunity to work with iThink and work at the Rotman School.
That's fantastic. So some excellent credentials to help us think through creativity today and what it means in our roles in our lives. So why don't we start there? We wrote a report about creativity. We talked to a lot of experts about it, and clearly other people are talking about it as well. Why don't you explain for us or why you think we are talking about creativity?
Well, I think the reason why we're talking about creativity is because it's in everything that we do. In the world that we're facing today and the challenges that we're facing, it'll never be a problem that we can find in the back of the book. It's not something that you can find the answer to. All the problems that we're facing, whether it's in our daily lives, it's climate change, it's equity and anti-oppression, all these things need better solutions. And the only way we're going to get better solutions is if we get creative. Because what we create is going to be our reality in the future. And so the more creativity we have now, the more novelty, the more interesting, and the more value that we can create.
Absolutely. The way I like to think about it is, in some sense, creativity always has been an important competitive differentiator, but what's changing is the context of our environment, that the pace of change of our environment from technological change is accelerating. Also, the type of societal challenges we have. You referenced climate change and anti-oppression and diversity. All these things are going to demand new creative solutions. And maybe that leads to kind of an obvious question, which is, how would you define creativity, Josie?
Well, I think about creativity as an insight, something that you see differently from other people. And so it's something that is novel, that's something that we haven't thought about in that particular way. And at the same time, it's something that has value, something that other people have utility for. And together, that's what creativity is. And what you'll notice about this is that novelty and value means that creativity can show up in all sorts of different ways. It's not simply just something that is drawn or it's not just in the arts anymore.
For sure. And I think what struck me when we were going through this exercise is creativity is kind of hard to measure in of itself, like ex ante. And but what we did find is you might be able to proxy for creative ability, for example, in an individual by looking at some underlying skills. Skills like, originality, inductive reasoning, fluency of ideas, critical thinking, things that I think are more common in the lexicon. Because when you say creativity is more about arts, I think that's a stigma that's related to the fact that people don't see creativity in themselves. We've seen in RBC surveys of youth, for example, that youth will rate themselves higher on skills like critical thinking or collaborating, but yet they won't recognize that those are some of the components or elements of that are good for creative thinking. They rate themselves lower on creative ability. And what we hope this report will do also is to get people to think about themselves as creative. One thing the report did on that as well is to highlight the different examples of creativity in the real world and coming out of the pandemic. So, I'll give a couple. I'd be curious on some that you've heard, Josie, to really illustrate this idea that creativity is an individual competency, and that can operate at kind of any level. It could be a grand transformative thing for society, or it can be an innovation within an organization or a process within an organization that can have value. And also, it's not just an individual competency, but one that can be an organizational competency or even an economic for an economy or a country. But a couple examples, we said in the paper we profiled Elias Anderson, a teenager in Ontario that developed a new app out of the pandemic, recognizing that sports stadiums were no longer filled with the noise of fans to egg on the players. And so he created a new audio technology that used, fans' microphones in their mobile phones in real time to create that sports atmosphere. And that application was used and had value. Another example from my world, I'm an economist at RBC Economics, and the pandemic kind of threw everything into disarray. The data we use and the models that we use weren't used to seeing something like the pandemic, and so we had to get creative and find new sources of data to provide more real-time information on where the economy was headed, and use various things, data, context, judgment, to understand how our models needed to adapt to the pandemic. And I would call both those examples creativity in a very practical context. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Josie?
Sure. I mean, the part of the challenge of creativity is that we all have this expectation of what it should be. But what we don't do enough of is nurturing all the little ways and the big ways, as you've highlighted, that creativity does show up. Sometimes simply, some example that sometimes we talk about. I don't know, when some women have long hair and they want to tie their hair up, sometimes you use a pencil just to stick it in your hair. I certainly do, because I have very long hair, and it's not like the pencil was created for that specific function itself, right? We're co-opting something that we think might have utility somewhere else, and that's creativity. And so when we set those standards for those expectations, our creativity has to be this grand, big gesture that changes the world. What actually nurtures creativities are all the choices that we make every day. So it might be, as simple as, usually you do a PowerPoint presentation, and this time, we're going to do it as a diagram. It might be ways in which, usually we have a Zoom conversation. Maybe we could have a walking conversation. Slight shifts in how we engage with each other and how we share information and can actually help ignite creativity and what that can look like in all sorts of circumstances.
I also wanted to point out something to illustrate that point, a chart that just actually disappeared that I want to explain, if you guys can put that back in the back office. But we tried to measure creativity in the economy to dispel this idea that it's only in what we thought was the important point, in that it's not, it's everywhere in the economy, not just in artistic fields. And so we took those underlying skill sets, that problem solving, collaboration, that are indicative of creative competency, and we measured where it is in job postings across the economy. And we found that a lot of sectors actually have a high demand for creative competencies, as measured by these input skills. And so what this shows in this bar chart is that actually education, STEM fields, and cultural sectors have the highest share of highly creative roles in the economy. And those are large percentages. But perhaps what's even more important to say is that it's not just those sectors. Every sector has this demand for creativity, and it's not fixed. We looked at job posting data to see how employer demand for skills was changing coming out of the pandemic. And we saw that creative competencies, or demand for jobs with creativity as a highly sought after skill, was increasing at a faster pace than overall job postings. And that was particularly true in education, healthcare, and sales and services, all three sectors that were very disrupted during the pandemic and might be changed forever. So really illustrating this point of high demand for creativity to deal with the challenges ahead. And one thing I want to say too is that through the process of writing the report, it was clear that there's a demand for creativity. But what made me optimistic is there's also a lot of things that suggest there could be a new supply of creativity. The pandemic, for one, in terms of the solutions that we saw so many people and businesses adapting to the constraints around them, and that type of creativity can carry forward. We know that in the past, crises have ushered in eras of innovation and creativity into society. Also, some of the very things that are disrupting our society, like digital technologies, also provide new ways for people to engage in the world and almost democratizes the creative process. And so things like that really make me think that we can rise to this challenge of the greater demand for creativity, and if we can continue to foster it. And so, and that's a natural next question, Josie. How do we foster creativity as people, as organizations, as countries?
So, I mean, when I had the opportunity to speak with John on a podcast on John Stackhouse on around creativity, and we had this conversation about how do you spark creativity, and we're talking a little bit about what does creativity mean in Canada, and what makes Canada really unique in the I think in the creative space is how diverse the country is, because what sparks creativity is different perspectives. The more you collaborate with people who see the world differently from you is an opportunity for you to learn something, for you to see an insight that you didn't see before, and for you to create something. So that's kind of one way, is like, how do you give yourselves the opportunity to collaborate and work with lots of different people? You know, a lot of times when we do work, we often think, well, who do I work best with? But maybe the question we should be asking is, who works differently from me? Who sees the world a little bit differently, and how can I learn from them? Another opportunity is very much in line with this, is how do you actually build your skills for empathy? How do you explore the world in a way that says, you know, someone has a totally different experience from myself. What can they bring to the table? How can it be my job to help them express their ideas in that space? And so what I actually found really interesting about this pandemic, and I'm really going to be interested in seeing what happens in the coming years, is that lots of people are connecting online with people they wouldn't normally connect with, right? We've had people find groups and organizations that maybe were not geographically close, but were brought together in this digital space. I'm very curious to see, you know, how will that spark creativity? How can we bring some of that collaboration, connection, and empathy with others into the work that we do every day?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think there's a couple other things that stood out to me as well in our conversations. I think something you yourself mentioned about how creativity also thrives on constraints. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. So constraints, you know, often we think that, you know, constraints are what stops us. In actuality, what we've seen is constraints are actually a source of inspiration, right? By using a limitation that we see in the world, we can actually leverage that. So here's an example. When an architect goes on and decides to build a building, it's not that they have unlimited resource, unlimited land, they have to work with what's there. So if the land is, you know, has an incline, is imbalanced in some way, they have to create from that. And often when they're creating from that, they actually see, they actually create something more interesting than they would have had they had unlimited resources. So think about it for a moment, where someone has said to you, these are all the materials you have, create what you can. That's really a moment to be able to leverage all your ideas and say, how can I express this in a new and different way?
So how do you then, Josie, approach bringing that type of problem solving into the classroom through I Think? How do you do it?
So the insight we had, over the last summer, actually, we were doing our own study, looking at different classrooms who have brought real world problem solving and the I Think challenge kits into their classroom. Now, I Think challenge kits are essentially a classroom ready resource that brings a real world organization, their challenge, into classroom and ask students for their help in solving it. And why we do that is because these challenges these organizations face, these are challenges that they have faced for years and they've never been happy with the solution. And what we've learned is that these fresh eyes that students can bring can help them highlight things that they haven't seen before. And so with that, what we saw was that when you have students be creative about problems that the world faces, that's a way to bring more opportunity to practice and bring those skills of collaboration and empathy into the classroom. And so with the I Think challenge kits, we're helping students get that opportunity to help the world, but also build their creativity skills.
That sounds great. With that, you know, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we will switch to questions and we can add more as we go. I want to start with one that bridges to what you just talked about in terms of bringing problem solving into the classroom, which is, what is the role, you know, in a larger sense of the education system in fostering creativity, and in teachers in fostering creativity, in your view?
Well, when it comes to fostering creativity in the education system is the place where we can lay the seeds for kind of all our future opportunities. So in many ways, a great education system is about giving students all kinds of experiences so that they, when they're ready, can make choices based on their experiences of what's interesting to them, what's exciting to them. And so similarly, I think the education system is a place where you can have the opportunity to practice and learn the skills that you'll need to leverage. What we're seeing, though, is that, and what I think is spending a lot of time thinking about, is that we don't magically graduate from high school or graduate from university and say, oh, wow, I can solve a problem, right? We want to bring more opportunities for students to be solving the problems that we're going to face in the future earlier, because frankly, we need the help. There are so many issues that we as adults haven't done enough around. What we need, I think, is more young people getting involved and helping us see things differently, because they have a spark of creativity that sometimes adults have lost a little bit on the way.
I think, absolutely the role of the education system and teachers finding opportunities to introduce that problem solving and incorporate that problem solving into curriculums is important. But I think there's also a role around, developing confidence in exercising those problem solving muscles. Not only are you, developing those underlying creative skills, but, you get more confidence in sharing your ideas and asking questions. And I think definitely in the classroom, and teachers can encourage those open discussion spaces, because as we've said before, as we keep hearing, it's sharing of ideas, blending of ideas that really is the driver of creativity. So I think that's great. I want to go to a question from Sarah, who asked about technology and how technology can amplify creativity, and maybe even about some of the particular technologies you find can be employed to help with collaboration, creative problem solving, or brainstorming.
Sure, I think that technology, technology is becoming so great at creating new spaces for us to work in, right? And so when I think about technology, I don't think about technology as a solution to creativity or collaboration, but just a tool that we can leverage. So similar, you can brainstorm using sticky notes or a whiteboard, but you can also brainstorm online on a screen. What I'm really curious about in the future is when we have really lo-fi ways of prototyping and creating new ideas, so that we can actually demonstrate and show that idea and not just talk about it, but actually demonstrate. So when I think about, are there lo-fi ways where we can do some of the kind of 3D work and some quick visualizations? Those are really great opportunities to really foster creativity.
That's great answer. From Barrett, who's asking, what would happen if you lose your spark of creativity? Has that happened to you, Josie? And how have you gone about regaining it?
So, I have to say that, when we were all kind of in seeing the same four walls of our homes every single day, I have to admit a little bit of my creativity felt like it was lost. And I'll give you kind of a couple of tips that I've over time that I found incredibly helpful. Go outside. When you go for a walk and go outside and don't take the normal route you take, right? Take a different route. Notice things that you hadn't noticed before. Imagine yourself, if you were a 3-year-old, what would you spend time looking at? It's those moments when we slow down and observe and take a look around us really helps break up creativity. The other thing is kind of going back to thinking about collaboration. Again, call somebody that you haven't talked to recently, somebody who sees the world a little bit differently, who you can just have a conversation about it. Or even better yet, pick up a book, watch a video of an idea that you've never spent time with. Instead of choosing the things that we have a natural tendency to, can we actually find opportunities where you're doing something that is a little off the beaten path, that maybe seeing something different will spark something in us?
Yeah, that's something that stood out for me personally in my experiences with this, but also what we heard through our research is that creativity is highly contextual. So in some cases that can involve deliberate choices about what type of environment employers or teachers or parents create where creativity can be expressed. But it also means that, I found my creative abilities have been impacted by what else is happening in my life. And so employing some of the things that Josie spoke about in terms of refreshing your perspective, but also in dealing head on with some of these issues in your personal or professional circumstances that might be impediments to creativity are really important because it's all interrelated. To another question, there's been a few people asking this one, Josie, about how do you demonstrate your creative potential to employers? What are employers looking for?
Well, so that's a really interesting question, and I think employers are also asking that same question. We have to, how do I know if someone's creative? One of the things that we've been recently actually thinking a lot about and talking about is this idea that what makes someone who kind of stands out from everybody else when you're talking about applying for a job or even kind of acceptance into university is how do you demonstrate the value of your experiences. Each one of us has lots of different experiences in our lives between might be some summer jobs, it might be projects that you've done in the classroom, it might be problems that you've solved in your school. All those are opportunities to talk about what is the experience you had and what is the unique lens and value that you've brought to that experience. We all come from a depth of experience, and the question for kind of demonstrating creativity is how do you help others see that? How do you help others see that you actually do see something differently? So even though that you may have been working on a project with 4 other people, each of you have learned different things and brought different things. So how can you highlight that? And I think that's where creativity can be nurtured and demonstrated.
Just a time for a couple more questions here from Ash. You mentioned working with people who think differently than you is important, but there's some obvious challenges there. Any suggestions for how you work better with these people? It probably has a lot to do with the empathy and listening you were talking about before, right, Josie?
Yeah, and I mean, when we talk about working with people who learn differently, people who see the world differently, often the best tip I can offer is simply to pause, because we have a tendency, this is just how our brain works, when someone asks us a question, we want to be working towards giving the perfect answer right away. But sometimes what we can do is just pause for a second and say, maybe they're trying to say something that I hadn't seen before. Instead of simply responding, try these 3 words. Tell me more. And when you ask that, then tell me more, they'll share. And when they share, what do you hear that's new, that's interesting to you? And instead of responding simply to say, you know what, Cynthia, I really found this interesting. Tell me more. The more you listen to somebody, the more you can understand their perspective, and the better that you can leverage their ideas to make your ideas your ideas together better.
Great. We need to wrap up in less than a minute here, Josie, but I want to give you the last word before I do. Any advice you would have for grade 9 students at this age?
I'd say, and I'd say the number one advice is try something new. Try something that you might not think you might be great at, because that's an opportunity for you to learn and that will bring creativity into your experiences.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josie Fung, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion about creativity, and thank you for your participation and for your great questions. Diversity truly drives innovation, and it is clear that you belong here. We hope that today has inspired you to explore how creativity will be present in your own future. The recording of this session will be available later today on the Learning Partnerships YouTube page, and you'll receive it along with a survey link via email tomorrow. Don't forget to fill out our student survey, shared by your teachers, parents, or workplace hosts, for your chance at winning one of 7 $100 prepaid Visa gift cards. Don't forget, there's another session after this at 1:40 Eastern Time on Careers in Technology, sponsored by IBM. Thanks again and have a great Take Our Kids to Work day.